For 20 years, Evelyn waited. 20 long years of quiet smiles, shared dinners, and endless small talk with the man who had shattered her heart. David, her husband, never suspected a thing. He had wronged her once, so deeply that it etched into her very soul, but Evelyn was patient. She knew that her revenge would come, not with a violent outburst or a flurry of rage, but in a way that would cut deeper than anything he could have imagined. It had all started with David's affair. They had been married for 5 years at the time. Evelyn had discovered the betrayal in the worst way possible, a forgotten message on his phone, a sweet nothing exchanged between her husband and another woman. She confronted him, and he, predictably, denied it at first. But when he realized the evidence was undeniable, David confessed. "I'm sorry," he had said, his face twisted in an approximation of regret. "It didn't mean anything. I love you." The words fell flat. Evelyn had stood there, staring at him, her heart breaking silently as she swallowed the pain. It wasn't the betrayal itself that haunted her, but how easily he could brush it off, how little her devastation seemed to matter to him. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she nodded and pretended to forgive him. "I understand," she had whispered softly. "Let's move past this." David had smiled, relieved, thinking he had dodged a bullet. He couldn't have been more wrong. Years passed, and Evelyn continued to play her part as the devoted wife. She supported his career, entertained his friends, and attended all the events with him. To everyone, they were the perfect couple. David's indiscretion faded into the background, so insignificant that even he forgot about it. But Evelyn? She never forgot. As the years went by, she planned. She waited. There was no rush. After all, real revenge takes time to ripen. It was on their 25th wedding anniversary that she decided it was finally time. David had become a successful businessman, and they lived in a grand house in the suburbs, complete with all the trappings of wealth and comfort. He was comfortable, secure in his life. He had no idea that his world was about to unravel. Evelyn's plan was subtle, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't looking closely. She had started by isolating him bit by bit. She encouraged his independence, suggesting he spend more time at the office or with his friends. Slowly, without David realizing it, she began to remove herself from his life. Then came the financial moves. Over the years, Evelyn had quietly siphoned money from their accounts, moving it into private investments, building her own empire in the shadows. David, ever trusting, never bothered to check. Why would he? Evelyn had always been the one to handle the household finances. By the time David realized something was wrong, it was far too late. One crisp autumn morning, as he opened a letter from their bank, his world began to collapse. Their joint account was empty. Their investments, gone. The house, which he had assumed was fully paid off, had a second mortgage on it. Evelyn had carefully and meticulously drained everything they had. In a panic, David rushed to find her, but Evelyn was gone. All that remained was a letter on the dining room table. "I waited 20 years to take this from you," the letter began. "You took my trust, my love, and shattered it. I've taken your wealth, your comfort, and your pride. We're even now." David stood frozen in the empty house, his hands trembling as he read the letter over and over. His mind struggled to comprehend the enormity of what had happened. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was gone in an instant. And Evelyn, his quiet, forgiving wife, had orchestrated it all without him ever suspecting. Evelyn, somewhere far away by then, smiled as she closed her suitcase and walked into her new life. She had waited 20 years, but now, the wait was over. David would spend the rest of his life wondering how he had been so blind, and that, to Evelyn, was the sweetest revenge of all. David was not a man easily broken, but as he stood in the cold silence of the empty house, he felt something inside him crack. The house that had once felt warm, filled with the hum of life, now seemed hollow, just like him. He reread the letter, hoping that somehow the words would change, that this was a joke, a nightmare from which he would soon awaken. But the truth remained: Evelyn was gone, and she had taken everything. For the first few weeks, David tried to regain control. He hired lawyers, investigators, anyone who could help him track down Evelyn and the money. But it was as though she had vanished into thin air. The accounts had been closed, the assets liquidated, and every trail they followed led to a dead end. She had been planning this for years, and David realized with a chill that there was nothing he could do to stop it now. In the months that followed, David's life unraveled. The house, which had been a symbol of their shared success, was foreclosed. His business, already struggling from his divided attention and poor decisions, collapsed as creditors came knocking, demanding repayment of debts he didn't even know existed. His friends, many of them more loyal to his wealth than to him, began to distance themselves. And worst of all, he was alone, truly alone for the first time in years. David's once proud and confident demeanor began to fade. He stopped showing up at meetings, stopped answering his phone. He was no longer the charming, successful businessman who had commanded respect. Now he was just a man, lost and defeated, haunted by the one person he had never expected to be his undoing. Evelyn, on the other hand, thrived. She had spent years carefully building a life for herself, one where she didn't need David or anyone else. She had moved to another country, assumed a new identity, and lived in quiet comfort. The wealth she had accumulated was more than enough to support her for the rest of her life. She didn't feel guilt. Why should she? David had broken their vows first, and she had simply chosen a more elegant form of retribution. And yet, every now and then, she wondered how he was doing. She imagined him in that big, empty house, pacing the halls, searching for answers that would never come. She would think of him sitting alone at night, perhaps replaying their last 20 years together, trying to pinpoint the moment he had lost her. But Evelyn didn't dwell on it. She had taken back control of her life, and for her, that was enough. She had no desire to see David again, no wish to gloat or rub salt in his wounds. Her revenge had been cold, calculated, and final. There was nothing left to say. Years passed, and the memory of David and their life together faded. For Evelyn, it became a distant chapter, one she rarely thought about. She had moved on, truly and completely. She had started painting again, a passion she had given up during their marriage, and found joy in the quiet solitude of her new existence. As for David, the once vibrant man had withered into a shadow of himself. He moved into a small apartment in a different city, far from the memories of his former life. He had lost everything, and though he tried to rebuild, it was never the same. He no longer trusted anyone, least of all himself. Every decision, every relationship, was haunted by the ghost of Evelyn's betrayal. But what haunted David most was the realization that she had been right all along. He had never truly understood her, never grasped the depth of her pain or the quiet strength she had hidden beneath her soft exterior. He had underestimated her, taken her for granted, and in the end, that had been his greatest mistake. One cold winter night, years after Evelyn had disappeared from his life, David sat alone in his small apartment. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse. He stared out the window, watching the snow fall in silence, and wondered how different his life might have been if he had just been a better husband. And somewhere in a far-off place, Evelyn stood by her own window, looking out at a sunset over the ocean, feeling the warm breeze on her face. She smiled softly to herself, knowing that she had finally truly won. The years slipped by, each one a slow reminder of the life David once had and the man he used to be. Time had a way of erasing everything, his wealth, his pride, his reputation, until there was nothing left but the memories that clung to him like ghosts. On the night of his 65th birthday, David sat alone in his apartment. The air was heavy with silence, save for the faint ticking of an old clock on the wall. The party invitations he had once received had long since stopped coming, and he had no family to celebrate with. His reflection in the window showed a man he barely recognized, old, worn down, hollow. The vibrant, ambitious man who once had everything was gone, replaced by someone who had learned the bitter lessons of life far too late. David had often thought about reaching out to Evelyn, but what would he say? He had nothing to offer her, no words that could undo the years of pain or heal the wound he had inflicted. And yet, he couldn't stop thinking about her. The woman he had once betrayed had become an obsession, her absence more palpable than her presence had ever been. She had taken everything from him, but in truth, she had only taken what he had first destroyed. One evening, as the winter wind howled outside, David opened his laptop and searched for her. He had tried before, of course, but Evelyn had been thorough in erasing herself. But this time he found a clue, a small mention in an art gallery blog about an anonymous painter who had recently gained attention for her haunting landscapes. The gallery was located in a small seaside town halfway across the world. It was enough. David sold what little he had and booked a one-way ticket. It took months of searching, wandering through small towns, chasing rumors and whispers of her name, but eventually he found her. She lived in a modest cottage by the sea, her life as peaceful and untouched as he had imagined. The years had been kind to her, more so than to him. Her hair was streaked with gray, her face lined with age, but she still carried that quiet grace that had once captivated him. David stood on the edge of the beach, watching her through the window as she painted by the light of the setting sun. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, he wondered if he should simply turn away, let her live the life she had built without him. But something inside him, a need for closure, for absolution, pushed him forward. He knocked softly on the door. When Evelyn opened it, her expression didn't change. There was no shock, no anger, just a calm acceptance, as though she had expected this moment to come eventually. "David," she said quietly, her voice betraying no emotion. "Evelyn," he replied, his voice hoarse with age and regret. I had to see you." She nodded, stepping aside to let him in, though neither of them moved. They stood there, face to face for the first time in decades, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. "I came to tell you that I'm sorry," David began, his words faltering. "For everything. For the affair, for taking you for granted. I never really understood what I had until it was gone. I was blind. I've spent the last 20 years thinking about what I did to you, how I destroyed us. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it." Evelyn's eyes softened, but she didn't speak. She had long ago made peace with what had happened, moved on from the pain he had caused. David had been a chapter in her life, one filled with both love and heartbreak, but it was a chapter she had closed. "I forgave you a long time ago, David," she finally said, her voice soft but firm. "Not for you but for me. Carrying that hate, that anger, it was too heavy. I let it go because I wanted to be free. And I am." David nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. He realized then that his journey wasn't about seeking her forgiveness, it was about forgiving himself, something he had never been able to do. "I'm glad you found peace," he said, his voice breaking slightly. I needed to see you one last time. To know you were okay." Evelyn smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "I am. And so can you be, David. It's never too late." They stood there for a long moment, two people who had once shared a life but had since traveled down very different paths. There was no animosity between them now, no unfinished business. Just the quiet understanding that their time together was over. David turned to leave, but before he walked away, he looked back at her one last time. "Goodbye, Evelyn." "Goodbye, David." As he walked back toward the beach, the sound of the waves filling the quiet, David felt something he hadn't in years, a sense of closure, of peace. He would never get back the years he had lost, but at least now, he could finally move forward, free from the weight of his past. And Evelyn, watching him disappear into the twilight, knew that she had made the right choice all those years ago. She had waited 20 years for revenge, but in the end, her true victory was the life she had built for herself, a life where she had finally found happiness without him.